today I'm delighted, as always, to be joined by my lovely colleague, Aurelia. And today we're going to be talking about jewellery valuations and how they work. So first of all, good morning, Aurelia. How are you?
Good morning, Alastair. Very well. Cold, but well, thank you.
It is a bit chilly, isn't it? I think we've decided on the right day where everyone's by the fireside to do this. Aurelia, first question. Why jewellery? How did you get into it?
Why jewellery? Why not? I mean, what's not to like in jewellery? I mean, diamonds are a girl's best friend, and it's just all the history that's behind pieces, the quality, the different quality of the craftsmanship, and also a bit of the geeky side, but all the technical aspect to it all, and how the stones are formed and where they come from, and all that fantastic nature coming to life through the stones. I think it's absolutely fascinating. So there we are. And then I was lucky enough to start working in auctions in the jewelry department, and then it was really being thrown in the deep end and cataloguing endless pieces. But actually, that's how you learn.
The best way to learn, isn't it?
Exactly.
That's very true.
Exactly. And yeah, it was fantastic. So here we are.
Indeed. But as you said, though, that there is quite a a substantial amount of opportunity to geek out with science in jewellery, isn't there? Really, when you think about stones and gemstones and everything else.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think the one thing that most people might know is that diamond and your pencil are pretty much the same thing. It's just that in a diamond, the atoms are just a bit more compact and look nicer. And it's sort of understanding all of those different aspects and what differentiates one stone from another. That's very interesting. And today I've got with me a few items that I usually bring at any valuations, and they help me identify which stones are set, because you have several stones that have the same color, and of course, depending on what sort of stone it is, identification is key to valuing a piece. You wouldn't put the same price on a quartz and a sapphire, for example, although you should be able to identify those two gemstones with a simple loop in that case. But I'll go through the rest of my equipment so I can talk you through all of that.
So before we start looking at the specifics of what you need to actually do the valuation, what is it that you want to see before you even get there? When you get an instruction from a client, or in some cases, obviously we have clients that go through brokers and insurers, what is it you really need to know? What is it you want to see? Is it a list of items? Is it what kind of things?
No, a list of items is always nice to have, but actually you can't always rely on previous valuations or things like that, because mistakes do happen every now and then. Something is called a certain gem or it's a different carat weight. So you really have to do the work from scratch to avoid any confusion, any mistakes, or you can pick up on something that was perhaps misdescribed and therefore potentially misvalued. So lists are very useful. The one thing that really helps are certificates. So certificates for diamonds, whether they are 50 pointers or 5 carats, always great to have, because obviously they will give all the exact weight and color and description, whereas when I'm looking at an item, a stone that's mounted, the mount gets in the way of being able to really assess perfectly well a gemstone. Obviously I'm not in a laboratory, so the conditions are a little bit different. So a certificate, that's the key piece that if a client has, beneficial.
Identify the stones as well with the certificate, doesn't it? One would assume, in terms of if you've got a stack of different items and you've got a stack of certificates, you know, it'll shorten the amount of time that you need to spend on looking at them, no doubt.
Absolutely, absolutely, and you should be able to match them up quite quickly. I suppose when you have a diamond line necklace and you have certificates for every stone, that's very helpful because you have exact weights, exact color and clarity, and you can really give a perfect value for the diamond line bracelet.
And these are predominantly GIA certificates that you see?
GIA, you'll see a lot, mostly for diamonds or colored diamonds. It doesn't mean that you don't get GIA certificates for stones such as sapphires and rubies. But the other very well-known and renowned laboratory for colored stones is Gubelin. And you have other laboratories such as HRD or IGI. They're a little bit less severe, let's say, with their identification and their grading. So I'm always a little bit careful when I'm faced with one of those certificates. Not to say that they're wrong, but just it's good to just double check what you're actually looking at. I had an example quite recently, actually, during one of my trips in Jersey, and a client presented me with an HRD certificate. And on the certificate, you have the drawing of a diamond and where you can find potential inclusions, and it's called a plot. And they had forgotten to plot some of the inclusions, and it really impacted on the clarity grade, and therefore the value that I then gave the diamond. So,
gosh, well, that's something to check up on, isn't it? But also, obviously, these people are very credible, but also you do get some rather bizarre certificates. I think I've seen a few over my years coming with rubies out of Thailand and places like that, which are not, shall we say, legitimate.
No, they would just say sapphire or corundum, which is absolutely fine, but it doesn't give you whether it's natural, or synthetic, or if it's been treated, and if so, what sort of treatment. So always be wary of any non-reputable certificates, even if you do think that you're buying a gem with all the right paperwork. It's good to just be a bit cautious.
Excellent. Now, you've seen all the paperwork, you potentially have a list, you get to the client's house, you sit down, and after a cup of tea and a bit of a chat, what's the first thing you do when you look at a piece of jewellery?
So the first thing, first lay out all my equipment. I usually come with a suitcase, but rest assured I'm not here to stay overnight. It's just that you do need quite a few bits and pieces. So for example, if I were to start with a diamond ring, my first item of my equipment that I would get out would be my loop. This is a 10 times loop, and I wouldn't go anywhere without it. It's the key to any beginning of valuation. So it's 10 times, and this particular one has different lights on it. It has light and UV light on it. And this is key to firstly identify what stone it is. In this case, I have a diamond ring, so I would be able to identify whether it was a diamond or a simulant or a white sapphire or something else. And it's also very helpful to see if there's any marks on the metal, which is very important, because if there's a signature, then you know that that's going to have an impact on the value and on the quality of the make. You'll often see, for example, items by Cartier will have that little extra attention to detail, and the finish of the piece will be softer and really well finished, whereas something that you might buy, say, on a market, as you mentioned, Thailand, might have slightly rougher edges. So the loop would be the number one piece of equipment that I start with. And then following that, I would then look at measurements of stones. So for that, we have different options, depending on the mount and depending on the size of it. For this ring, for example, the diamonds are in a sort of open setting. So I have a piece of equipment that's very important. It's called a presidium. The presidium has numbers all around, and it will give you precise dimension of a stone. And you have two options to measure a stone. You have this side, if you can access the stone relatively easily, or if you have a stone that has a collet setting all around the stone, you would use this side to access the points of it. You also get an extra little piece that comes with it to calculate the depth of the stone if the setting is quite tricky. So it's just an extra piece of equipment, but very precious. So that's one piece that I can use to measure the stones. If I have a piece of jewellery that has, let's say, pave setting or smaller stones, I will use what's called spread gauges. Now you'll notice I've got three. And why three? Because you get all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and they're not actually all on the same spread gauge. So I do vary between one or another depending on the cut of the stone. So these are very helpful if you're looking at smaller stones and you can't really access the sides of the stone to measure exactly. Or if you have a very large piece that has several stones, you can't count each diamond, each stone individually using the presidium. So you'd use a spread gauge, and it would be an approximation of the carat weight. So those are the items that I would use to look at the carat weight, and then you do some calculations depending on.
I was going to say, is there a formula then to work out what the carat weight of the stone is?
Well, exactly. So firstly, you need to identify the stone properly. Make sure that you are actually looking at the right stone, because that will impact the calculations, because every stone has a different what's called specific gravity, which is a different weight variation, and that impacts on the calculations that you would use to calculate the carat weight. And then of course you have, depending on the cut of the stone, a different adjustment there as well. So there's all these factors to take into consideration. Essentially, the absolute key is making sure you've identified the stone properly. And for that, for diamonds, if I was a bit unsure, I could use what's called the diamond tester. And that would give me a little sound to tell me whether it is a diamond or not. So I've switched it on. And now
I hope you've tested your ring before this, because there aren't any surprises.
Well, I was going to say, I hope it buzzes. Let's try again live. Let's see. There we go. Good. So this is very, very practical as well, but when you have a piece again with smaller stones, and it's very difficult with just the use of a loop to try and really identify the stone because of the setting and the gold or the metal that surrounds it. So this is very practical to just place on the stone, and it will tell you whether it's a diamond or not. If it's not, it doesn't make any sound. And if it touches metal, it will tell you that it hasn't pinned the right.
With the diamond testers, are they 100% foolproof? Because I've heard that with things like moissanite and various other simulants, they can be potentially, not quite as accurate. Is that true?
Yes, well, you usually have, you can get these diamond testers that will tell you whether it's moissanite or CZ, for example. This one just tells me if it's diamond or not, and this will work with the other simulants.
Okay, fine. So we know what it is. We know what size it is. So okay, you carry on.
If it's not a diamond, and I need to identify which stone it is, I have a very fancy piece of equipment, which is a refractometer. You have a torch that you screw on at the back, and this will really be the key piece of equipment to help me pin down what sort of stone I'm looking at. It's very useful, for example, for pink stones, because there's quite a few that actually look quite similar, and you'd need another another test other than a loop to be sure of
So
what you're
we're in
looking
kind
at.
of like ruby, tourmaline, that kind of area.
I'm thinking more morganite, or these stones that are not used as much. Tourmaline compared to ruby is quite different. Once you know what you're looking at and what you're looking for, you can tell the difference. The color, everything is quite different. So it's sometimes very useful as well for, I mentioned white sapphires, so that's quite useful because they can really lead to confusion, white sapphires. So this refractometer will help me identify, or at least narrow it down to one stone or another. So the way it works is you get given what's called RI liquid, refractive index liquid, and you place a little bit on the inside of the refractometer. So it opens and you have a little piece of glass, and you put a drop of the smallest amount of liquid on here, and then you'd place the stone. You'd have to switch on the torch so that you can actually read what numbers are showing up through the screen. So what are those numbers? Those numbers are the refractive index of a gemstone, and what that is that the refractometer calculates the speed at which light bends once it enters the stone. Because it's denser than air, it has a different speed than when light passes through air. So that piece of equipment will help identify that. And stones are either doubly refractive or singly refractive, just to add a bit of confusion.
If it wasn't complicated enough, Aurelia, let's make it more simple.
Yeah, exactly. And so, for example, zircon are strongly doubly refractive. And what that means is that once the light enters the stone, it splits again and exits the stone in different directions. And in fact, a stone like zircon, when you look at it just with a 10-time loop, you can actually see that there's doubling inside. It's like you've got blurred vision. It's really quite interesting. So this, the measurements given on the refractometer will give me 1 or 2 numbers. And depending on that, if it's 1 number, it will tell me that it's a singly refractive gemstone. And if it gives me 2 numbers, it's a doubly refractive gemstone. So again, that will help me identify what gem we are looking at.
Okay, and so now we know what the gem is, we know what size it is. Where do we go from there?
Right, so then just some overall description in terms of the metal. So we can look at whether it's platinum, gold, or silver, and usually you'll find some marks on the piece of jewelry. If it's a ring, it's usually inside the band. If it's a bracelet, it's towards the tongue and the clasp. So that will be of big impact as well, given the price variations of platinum and gold, especially right now. So that's key, and it will give you also hallmarks or signatures, and all that contributes to the quality and then the price of an item. So that's what I would be looking for. And then we're just looking at some measurements. And if it's a ring, for example, I've got the ring sizer, and that will tell me what the size of the band is. So that's always very practical. There we are. And if you have a necklace or a bracelet, I'll just use a simple ruler to see what the measurements are there. If I'm looking at loose stones, which doesn't happen very often, I will use specific tweezers, and they've got little grooves inside to really grab the stone properly. And they also lock, because loose gems have a tendency to jump.
Be dropping them, do you?
Yes, yeah. And they do jump. They have a life of their own, and they just pop out. So they lock, which is very handy as well. And also, one piece of equipment that you never go without anywhere is a gem cloth. So this one is a specific cloth that will really remove any grease and any product left on a stone. So diamonds are the one stone that keep the most grease So it's very important to clean that so that then you're able to assess the color and clarity, especially the color.
I can imagine, Aurelia, that if you go and visit a home that has a jewellery box full of 50 items, some of which get worn very occasionally, and none of which have been cleaned for quite a while, it's probably not disconcerting, but I can imagine it's distracting having dirt or grease on a stone, isn't it? And it must take you a little while to actually get through that.
Well, exactly. If it's easy enough to swipe with the cloth, then that's great. Sometimes you do have a little bit more dust or let's call it dirt, because that's what it is, and that can impact the color of the stone. So I would recommend just use a toothbrush, very liquid and warm water to give everything a clean, and you'll find that your jewelry has a second life suddenly, and also then it helps whoever's looking at your jewelry to identify the color of a stone in good condition. To help me with that as well, I've got what's called a grading card. So it's a piece of card that you then fold in a particular manner, and the way it then ends up when it's folded is useful for when you have loose stones as well, because you can roll them and it won't slide. So it's a particular way of folding the card. So this white card will help identify the color. So what you do is you place your ring, your diamond piece of jewelry, and you put it in your piece of card, and you look at how different of a color it is compared to a white background, and that will help give a color for the diamond. But that is only useful if you've got good daylight, rather than a very yellow or pink light that might be very superficial and add some different colors to the stone. So with that in mind, I'll always have my my desk lamp, which is a daylight equivalent, which will give me the best light.
And a true light source. Yeah.
Exactly, an external light source. Regardless of whatever's around me, at least I know that light source will be the one that I need to value the color of the diamond.
Excellent. Well, Aurelia, that's been fascinating. Now, one thing I'm going to ask you, and it might be a bit of a sore subject, but how often is it that you actually get, and you're down there looking at the stone and you realize, my gosh, they're not diamonds?
It does happen, unfortunately. So yes, it has happened. It's never a very nice conversation to have with the client. So I do always try to see what's happened to the piece of jewelry. Has it been taken in for repair? Has the stone been lost? And then the client's decided to replace it just with a simulant, because you wouldn't tell the difference unless you're actually looking at it with a loupe. So yes, it has happened. Not my most favorite moments that I can recall, but it's always good to get at least a good indication of what you actually own, and then you're not overpaying on insurance. But equally, I've had the opposite of several clients who have then come to realize that actually they own diamonds which they thought were just costume jewelry. So that's a nice conversation to have.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just while we're on the subject of diamonds, and I'll just cover this quickly. Obviously, there seems to be in modern times a fascination with synthetically grown diamonds. Are these easy to identify?
So, so the lab-grown diamonds are impossible to identify with the equipment that a valuer would have. You would have to send your diamond to laboratory and ask for a specific report on whether or not it's a natural diamond or a lab-grown diamond, because only with their equipment, huge machine, can they tell the difference. Essentially, a lab-grown diamond has all the same properties, the same atomic combination than a natural grown diamond. So no, we wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
No, it's a fascinating sphere at the moment, that world. It's yeah, I'm not sure whether it's going to take over or not, but I think people would still prefer to have something that's been in the ground for thousands of years rather than something that was grown by some people in a laboratory, but that's just my thoughts on it. Alas. Aurelia, thank you ever so much for joining us today for a quick rundown on how jewellery valuations work and what we do when we come to value jewellery. So thank you ever so much for your time today.
My pleasure. It was lovely to discuss this with you.
As always, Aurelia, as always. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much again for joining us today for the Dare Dallas webinar. Please do stay in touch over the next 12 months. Again, it's been a pleasure over these last 12 months doing the webinars and articles for you. And please do get in touch if you have any specifics that you want us to cover in any of our webinars. And we're always more than happy to have a chat and put an article together or a webinar together for one of you or your clients. So please do get in touch. So thank you ever so much. Have a lovely Christmas, ladies and gentlemen, and a prosperous new year. And we will speak to you then. Cheerio. Bye-bye now.